We're good? So I would like to call the Monday, April 7th meeting of the Westwood School Committee to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as always, we would like to thank Westwood Media Center for their partnership, and they are recording this meeting for later viewing on all of their platforms. It is not going to be available live tonight because the Select Board is also meeting. So I'll hand it over to Tim.
Sure, thanks. It's going to be a relatively brief superintendent's report this evening. But just especially because we actually only had our last meeting a couple of weeks ago as well too. So, but did want to share a couple of things up here. So first, these are grade 6 students at Thurston dissecting pig hearts. Dr. Arkin, who's the parent of a grade 6 student and a cardiovascular surgeon, gave a presentation to grade 6 students during class. Some classes saw him live, while others viewed a recording of the talk. Students were learning about body systems, and he came in to talk about how the heart works. So, some of our activity at Thurston. So last Saturday, the Salem Film Festival featured a showing of the top 10 documentaries by high school students. For the second year in a row, a Westwood High School student submission was selected as the winning entry. So congratulations to senior Terrace Jones, whose film A Celebration of Life received the top award. Junior Ryan Williams and senior Jonathan Bertone were also acknowledged as the defending champs. Their film, The Heroes of the Cold War, was also featured. So congrats to our filmmakers who spent countless hours working on these films. And well beyond the school day, as well as to our visual arts department. So congratulations to them. When we post this, you can actually, that link will be live and you can see the film itself. And then had the pleasure, I know I had the pleasure on Friday morning to see the internal presentation of the Sheehan Grade 5 play, which was Newsies Junior. So some shots in the play. I know one of our committee members was backstage doing some work there as well too. Was a great production, was great to see it. And I think, as you said to me, Dory, the kids came a long way in the last week getting ready for the show. So,
it was incredible, yeah.
So congrats to all of them and to everybody involved. So in terms of, just before going to the next slide, we're going to have Steve Ouellette come up in a minute and talk about cybersecurity and some of our work there. Just to provide an update to the committee on our strategic planning process. So our strategic planning team was assembled. We have 22 members, which includes district administrators, school administrators, teachers, parents from all levels, and we have 3 students. We have a high school junior, a high school sophomore, and an 8th grader on our group as well too. So we had our first meeting last Thursday. We're going to be meeting every 2 weeks, and we'll have more to share as our process comes along. So we just had our opening meeting. I think it was a really good meeting to start off. I know both, I should have mentioned school committee members, so both Joanna and Dory are part of that group as well too. So we're happy to kick that off. At this point, I'm going to ask Steve Ouellette, our Director of Technology, Learning, and Innovation, to come up and talk about our work with cybersecurity here in Westwood Public Schools.
Thank you, Tim. Not the most glamorous topic, but we've been thinking a lot about cybersecurity in the district, so I want to talk about 3 things. We received a almost $22,000 grant. You will be voting on it later. Hopefully the vote will be yes. This is a hardware appliance that basically will secure all our sensitive internal data. It actually drops off the network and goes dormant. So if we ever got hit by a malware attack or something, there would be no way for that data to be compromised. So that's a really good thing, and the state put out this grant opportunity, and we were fortunate enough to get that. So again, that you'll be voting on that later today. We also, well, you can just, the second bullet, this is a renewed grant from the state. So we are offering cybersecurity training for staff. The first bullet was about a technical issue. The second one, honestly, 75% of all cyber incidents are really human error related. Social engineering, phishing attempts, we've all seen it. And so we are providing that training. Again, this is a state-sponsored program. It is optional training, and that launched about 2 weeks ago, and they have all until the rest of the calendar year to complete that training. I will be sending out a memo to families for 3 reasons. One is to inform them of this grant program so that our community understands that we take this very seriously, and that we're trying to provide that assistance for our staff. 2, we are going to be providing kind of a condensed home version of the cybersecurity course. I think parents can or families can complete it in under 1 hour. It has some really good content, so that will be made available to all our families. And 3rd, because the training for staff is optional, highly recommended but optional, we're hoping to add some incentives. So I'm going to be asking the community for those that wish to donate some kind of a raffle prize or something. And for people that have high completion rates, they would qualify to enter a raffle and win some wonderful prizes. So that's the plan. I hope to send that communication out tomorrow. And then lastly, we have a newly minted cybersecurity incident response plan. That's essentially a playbook if we were to have a breach. I don't want to say this out loud, but I will. We have not had a serious breach any time in the recent past. That's more of a like when versus if. We will deal with that. The occurrence of cyber incidents has just gone way up, and we need to be prepared for it. I'll say also for that incident response plan, the organization in the second bullet, they reviewed it, as well as the National Guard, and they were actually very complimentary of the plan, and they've asked if Westwood's could be used as a template for other districts. So we're very happy about that. So those are 3 cybersecurity updates. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
I do just want to take a moment, and Steve's being a little humble, but the work that we're doing here, this is not an area that municipalities are generally, is not generally an area of strength. I really appreciate Steve's proactive approach to dealing with cybersecurity issues, and I know in talking with colleagues, a lot of colleagues in other districts have picked your brain for how they can enhance their own work. So thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. All right, and with that, that is the end of our superintendent's report this evening.
Great, thank you. So we will open it up to public participation. This is an opportunity for anybody who would like to address the board to come down and share their comments. We do ask that you limit it to 3 minutes. And I think because we have so much to go over tonight, we would want to limit it to maybe 15 minutes total, if everybody's comfortable with that. In terms of the time for comment.
About the timing of the, sorry, I should have said this. With your approval, I should have said this during the superintendent's report. So just to be clear about, I'm assuming a lot of people are here for the facility study. This is the start of a conversation this evening. This is not the end of a conversation. And I'll talk about, there'll be multiple opportunities for sort of a public back and forth on this after the presentation. I just want to say that to sort of preempt the public comments before this evening. So.
Great, thank you. So if anybody would like to address the board, feel free to come on down.
Good evening, school committee members, parents, staff of the school. My name is Stacy Theophilou. I live at 10 Long Meadow Drive, and I haven't yet started my time. Okay, during office hours last week, I met with the superintendent and school committee to discuss the problem of some school buses arriving late to the high school, a problem that has been going on for the entire school year. I would like to share mostly with other concerned parents what I have learned, so I apologize that my back is to you. I have less than 3 minutes, so this is a very abbreviated summary. How many students are late every day? We don't really know. I was told at one point over 100 per day. A second problem is that bus stops were consolidated. Some new stops are very far for some students, and in the case of my kids, I believe our new stop is in a very unsafe location. These issues were caused by Connolly Bus Company not supplying the full number of drivers that we are supposed to have per our contract. There has been minimal effort by the superintendent to address this. In his words, this is out of my hands. I escalated this issue to the school committee and asked for their oversight and intervention. I was told that the superintendent reported that he was working on a solution for next year. In last week's meeting, I learned the following. There is, in fact, no solution in the works for next year. I was told that the school was billed for and has been paying for the drivers that we did not receive all year, that we have just requested a refund and have just been given a refund. Just to let you know, one bus costs $470 per day. So 100 days worth of school buses is almost $50,000. I have also learned that we're not accurately tracking this issue. This is important because if buses are late, we have financial penalties in our contract. Our contract says that that buses have to arrive by 8:10 for the 8:15 start of school. We are only tracking, or the school is only tracking, if buses arrive at 8:14 or later. And we've not asked for any financial refunds for any late buses. I believe that we can fix these problems, or at least attempt to, and in ways that are not in conflict with the bus company. But the administration and school committee is not doing anything. I think it is a great failure for the students and families of Westwood. I am escalating these issues to the appropriate oversight bodies, namely the Department of Education, the town auditors and selectmen, and the Massachusetts Attorney General. If anyone listening would like help on how to fix these issues, I remain available. If anyone would like to join me on these filings, please contact me. If getting your children to school safely and on time is important to you, you should know that this is a big liability for next year, and I recommend voicing your concerns to the school committee. If anyone would like a suggestion on what to do with the money that was billed for services never received, unnecessarily paid, and just refunded, I suggest it be used for the portion of the Mandarin program that was cut in the February school committee due to not having enough money in the budget.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to address the committee? I'm seeing nobody. All right, we'll close public comment. Moving along to updates. So in terms of my update, we, as Stacy mentioned, we had our office hours last week. It was a small crowd. There were just 3 people who came, but it was great. I think it allowed for some opportunity for learning and casual conversation, and we talked about bus timing. We also talked about kind of this capital plan and the process that we went through and what we intend to go through, and then talked about the guidance at the high school. Somebody was looking for more insight into that. And one of the best takeaways for me was learning about how students at the high school were helping each other. A group of like 10 friends that were reading each other's essays and giving feedback, and that was just really nice to hear. So again, the office hours are a great opportunity for actual conversation with the committee and the district leadership. It's pretty casual. You can drop in and ask whatever questions you want. And unfortunately, they're done for the year. We'll have another one in the fall. We try to do them quarterly. But as Tim said, there'll be other opportunities to discuss the facilities plan in the spring. So I don't know if anyone else has updates. No?
No.
All right.
Kevin from Legislative Council.
Oh,
Yeah,
Kevin?
did you want to?
I think it was a shorter meeting in terms of content. Big takeaway is we do have a survey being sent out to students regarding the food service department. I think that'll be done at the
Oh, thank you.
at the class meetings later this week, and so I think that'll be good to see where the students think of the new breakfast program and all the good work that Chef D has been doing. I'm really appreciative of his efforts. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Are we ready for the main
Hand it back
attraction
over.
of the day?
Let's jump in.
Let's jump into the Westwood Public Schools Facilities Master Plan. So I want to recognize that and I've got some initial slides that I'm going to introduce. I'm not sure if Michelle, just you're coming up, or Michelle and Don are both. Michelle. So our friends from Durham Whittier, who are our partner in this project, Michelle Rogers and Don Walter, are here this evening, and Michelle will come up momentarily. But I do want to at least do a little bit of framing. So by way of background, so about a year ago in spring of 2024, the public schools began work on a master facilities plan, and we have 2 key goals. The first is that we want to identify capital improvements. We want to identify the needs for our schools across the district and create a prioritized list with a work of estimated cost. So that's the first thing. We really want essentially the identification of all the things that we need to do to bring our facilities up to where they need to be with a prioritization. But the second goal is we want to develop options for a long-range plan. And again, the key here is that there are options, it's not just one plan, but we want to develop options for a long-range plan that addresses our district-wide educational and facilities needs. You'll hear me say this multiple times tonight, it's got to be both, not one or the other. But knowing that we want to put a particular focus on our needs at Thurston and at Sheehan. Given that there are also significant needs in municipal buildings in Westwood, we hired one designer collectively between the school department and the town to develop a master plan for both of us. Doran Whittier was selected. They began their work in late spring of 2024. So the key elements of the master plan, and this is essentially sort of an agenda for Michelle as she talks through her slides. They did an assessment of our existing conditions getting into each of our buildings. They did a series of educational visioning with us. That's not really part of this presentation, but that's what led to our portrait of a graduate, which is now informing our strategic planning work. They did an analysis of our enrollment and future enrollment as well as capacity of our buildings. They identified potential solutions, and then they did some work on estimating costs. So with that, Michelle, I'm going to bring you up if you don't mind, please.
I just think it's worth iterating that this is the first time that we're talking about this. Nothing in this presentation has been discussed or vetted amongst the committee or with the community. So I know the last time we did this, like 10 years ago, it caused a firestorm, so I'm trying to prevent that. Nothing that we're talking about here is I don't even know how to say it. It's just not.
Nothing's been decided.
We're starting the
Yep.
conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, and for clarity, Michelle will do, and at the end, I'll talk about our next steps as a committee and what our timeline is for decision points, knowing there'll be months and months until we have to make our first key decision relating to this project. And then we'll have time for that feedback that you're talking about in the interim.
Yep.
So Michelle, you can give me the cue on when to advance slides, but the floor is yours.
So first, I'm going to apologize for my notes. We have lots of slides to
sorry,
cover,
this is the
so
wrong
if
set of
I
slides,
see me
but-
referring to my notes, it's because there's so much information to cover tonight. So I do want to start with your agenda and these lovely monkeys.
Sorry, we have is Andy still here or no? Okay. Okay.
It worked before.
It did work before and now it stopped working. It's the 365, yeah.
What?
No, we're building a little extra drama here. My apologies for this. That is not by intention. I'm just going to pull up the Google slide version. We'll have to run it from there.
We'll wing it.
Oh, the tech person, I think works with Steve for this building, maybe?
Hold it up.
Okay.
First slide.
Okay.
Is
Okay,
this
let's
not-
run it this way.
Is this not the right?
We'll be okay.
Okay.
We're okay.
Can you all see the same thing that I'm
Yep.
seeing? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Pay no attention to the fonts. Okay, so we'll just dive right in. So we started assessing the existing conditions. You can move forward whenever. What I want to do is just walk you through our process. What we do is we take our team of civil engineers, structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, fire protection. Do you need to switch?
No, we're okay.
Okay. All our engineers, we send them out to every single building, and they do a photographic and narrative study of each of the buildings. And what they do is they identify any specific issues that they see. One thing I want to make sure is that you all understand that our job is to find the problems, whether they're big or small. But the first thing we all noticed was that Westwood takes really good care of their schools. So when we identify problems and situations, it could be something that we're thinking that needs immediate repair or replacement, or something that you're going to have to put into your capital plan 10 years from now. And so that's what the scope of our work was. So we identify these specific issues, and then we also provide recommendations for each of those. We take all of that information and put it into a spreadsheet, which you can see over here on the right-hand side, and then we put it into certain categories. We identify whether it's a health, safety, and welfare issue, a code compliance, the accessibility, or just maintenance. And this helps us to identify what category it should be placed in when we talk about the repair timeline. In a 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6, or 7 to 10 years, or even beyond that. And just one more moment. When I talk about code compliance, even if the check mark is in the code compliance, it's important to understand all your buildings are code compliant as of today. Sometimes we get into repairs that will trigger updating those issues into code compliant for today's codes. So even though you might get that checkbox, for us it's making us aware that if you reach a trigger, we may have to go back and correct something that was not originally planned to be corrected. So once we go through that, we send go ahead, you can go forward. We send this off to our cost estimator, and they do a cost of replacement or repair, and then we add in the estimates to get us to an estimated project cost for each line item. Something to be concerned about here. Lots of caveats in this spreadsheet. This is per line item, so if we identify something like a plumbing pipe that needs to be repaired,
Oh, gee, I'm sorry
that's
about
okay.
that.
Are you telling me to speed up?
No, not at all, my apologies.
If we identify a plumbing pipe in the ceiling that needs to be repaired, we do not include in this particular line item the cost of replacing that ceiling piece. So that becomes part of a project cost, which we then will put into once we start putting the line items together. The other part is the cost estimates in this spreadsheet are in today's dollars, or during the time that they were estimated, which was in January of 2024. And it's not until we get into the next section where we identify the years, go ahead, one more forward, where we begin to think about escalation of the costs. So we work closely with the administration to determine what priority, whether something should go in the first 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6, or further out. And then once we actually put it into our options cost, you will start to see the escalation of those costs. So if somebody were to take this spreadsheet and compare it to what you'll see later for those costs, those numbers, what you see later will have been escalated, so the numbers won't be exactly the same. Okay, we've talked you all the way through our spreadsheets, and this is where your totals are going to show up. Go ahead. One way of summarizing all this information is by this graph. So in the columns in this graph, I know the people behind me can't see this, but they're called site accessibility, exterior building envelope, interior building elements, accessibility, structural elements, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, and then the final one is the functional use of space. We color code these so that they're easy to read, and red being the poorest quality and purple being the best. So quickly looking at this, you can see that Pine Hill School is purple across the board, which is what you would expect. It's a brand new building, and it meets all your needs, including your functional use of space, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The two buildings in the most need are Thurston Middle and Sheen School. And you can see exactly where those needs are within each of those buildings. So for accessibility, both buildings have accessibility issues. Both buildings have mechanical, electrical, and plumbing system issues. And Thurston has more functional use needs than Sheen at this moment. So what is functional use? You can go ahead forward. To determine the functional use of a space, we use the MSBA guidelines as a benchmark for determining what size certain spaces should be based on their function. So the color coding that you see here identifies general classrooms in blue, art, music in red, cafeteria, food services are in green, gymnasium orange, media center yellow. The MSBA gives us certain square footages for each of those spaces based on the enrollment of the school. So things like a cafeteria would be bigger or smaller depending on the enrollment. General classrooms are 950 square feet, and kindergarten's 1,200, always across the board. We look at each of these spaces, and I know you can't really read all these numbers, but we take this and we compare those to that MSBA chart, and we determine how many spaces are right-sized within the MSBA guidelines of 10%, oversized, or undersized. Go ahead, sorry. In this chart, you can see how each of those schools measured up. Again, Pine Hill being in the best condition because it was built to meet MSBA guidelines. It is all green, 100% right-sized. Thurston, you can see, has 68% of its spaces are undersized by more than 10%. And Sheen is 46% of those spaces are undersized by more than 10%. So it's an important factor to know that even though you might have the right number of classrooms or spaces within the building, they may not be large enough to suit the number of students that are using that space. Any questions about the work that we've just talked about?
Just to emphasize, the schools are safe, correct?
The schools are safe, yes. Sorry, I want to be very, not only are they safe, but they're also well-maintained.
Okay.
All schools have needs. This is why we do this maintenance program, right?
Yeah, and I think to that, just one thing I'll share, and I know we actually mentioned this at office hours the other night. There was, early on in the process, Doran Whittier identified one, like, fix this now issue. That was the modular roof at Thurston, that we fixed right then and now, right? So anything that elevated that level, we addressed, and that was the only thing that elevated that level early on in the process.
Okay.
All right, so we'll go on to the next phase then. So once we know what we have for facilities conditions, we then go and analyze the enrollment forecasts and the capacity of your schools. And this is going to help us just determine what you need for future spaces. So first, what you have, and then what you need. Go ahead. Sorry. The way that we determine what you have is based on a formula, again, by the MSBA. So high schools and middle schools use 23 students per classroom, and then they put in a utilization factor of 85%. And that is to accommodate the schedules that you have. You need flexible schedules at both the high school and the middle school so that you can offer wider ranges of programs. Elementary schools are a little bit more simple. You have 18 children per classroom in a kindergarten and 23 students per classroom in your grades 1 through 5. And so that's pretty simple math. We take the number of classrooms and we multiply it by those students. That will get us to our capacity level. Go ahead. Oh, there we go. So when we look at this, another one of these charts, we are looking at the black box, tells us what we have. Our capacity for the high school in this is 939 students. That's your capacity. You currently have 850 students, so you're about 90% full. And the future forecast enrollment is 894. You'll be about 95%.
And when you say future forecast, you mean 10 years out?
10 years, yeah. So the 10-year, the high school has a peak, which we'll talk about in just a few moments, that is just before that 10-year. But all the other schools, your peak is pretty much at year 2033.
And that's because the MSBA only wants 10 years?
That's because our enrollment forecasts only measured 10 years.
But in theory, if we're building buildings for 70 years, and you're just looking 10, how do you account for that, I guess?
So if you enter into the MSBA program, they'll do their own forecast of enrollment. We have hired, as part of this process, a demographer to do this in-depth study and carried it out 10 years. When you get beyond 10 years, the numbers are less reliable. So you can rely pretty heavily on the next 10 years, and you can project based on those 10 years and the enrollments that you have. You can project a little bit further out.
Okay.
But right now, we're looking at just the 10 years for that. Over on the Thurston School, the capacity here is 665 students, and that was based on including the existing modulars, those existing modular classrooms. But your projection in 10 years is 750. So you see that you'll be 113% over capacity in the year 2033. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that high schools and middle schools, generally speaking, you want to be about 85% at capacity, which allows you flexibility among your grade levels. So if you have a larger bubble working its way through the middle school, you want to be able to address that and not have every single classroom full based on that. If we go into the elementary schools, we're looking at a different enrollment because you have 4 elementary schools. I won't read all the numbers to you again. Same theory here. The bold box tells you the capacity. The number over tells you where you'll be in 2033. And as you can see here, the only school that does not have a little red bar at the top of it is Pine Hill School. So Pine Hill, the green, is where you'll be in 2033, which is a reduced number of students in the Pine Hill School if you're using the current catchment areas for these schools. So that's the area in which the students are districted into each of those schools. So this assumes that you don't change any of those lines.
And can you explain that, why we would decrease over 10 years at Pine Hill?
So when you look at the demographer statement, what they projected was that the other districts had older families that were likely to move out, and those homes would be bought by younger families. And in those areas, in the Pine Hill, they didn't see that kind of movement happening in the next 10 years.
Yeah, can I restate that in just a little more in layman's terms, right? So families that move in when a new school opens, that particularly move into the Pine Hill district, when they come in with, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, generally won't move out when their kids hit middle school and high school. So those houses won't turn over at the same level that houses in other parts of town do, where you currently have a higher level of middle schoolers, high school kids, families that look to downsize after their children move out of the house, essentially.
Can I ask a few questions? Does the 355 include Boston students?
It's a projection based on the enrollments that you have and the students that you have. So yes, it would include your Metco students coming in.
I'm a betting man. There's no way. If I had the over on that, I'd bet the over on that. But if DraftKings gave a line, because that's implying then that you'd only have about 315 residents, which would be by far 315 people that live in Westwood. That kind of not the Boston students. We have about 40 Boston students. Okay. I mean, I do want to double click on this at some point because I'm not. It doesn't seem. Something seems amiss, because over the last, if you look back 20 years when we haven't redistricted, we would never have seen a number of like 315 in that area. And I know you're going to say there's move-ins, but actually the data doesn't show as many move-ins as you think. So I don't want to go down a rat hole, but I think we did need to double click on the demographics a little bit.
Sure.
I agree.
So one thing to look at is, although all of those have little red markers at the top of them, if you go over to the district-wide, if we were to add up all of your classrooms in the elementary school level, and you look, this is what your capacity is across the district. So across the district, you have a capacity of 1,540 students from K through 5, and you're forecasted to have 1,517 in the year 2033 for K through 5. So, phew, you got enough classrooms across the whole district, you just don't have them in the right place. Does that make sense?
You mean in terms of districting?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
with current district lines.
Yep, if you took all your classroom capacities and you looked and you said, district lines don't matter, we've got enough, based on that.
And when the MSBA runs its numbers, it does not look at a per school,
It does
right?
not.
It looks district-wide
Correct.
at the elementary level.
Correct.
So would that have factored into the size of Pine Hill? Because they had to look at the whole district.
Yes.
And you were running that?
So if I
Okay.
want to project what your question might be, which would be, did you build the right size school? I would look over there and say, yeah, absolutely, we've got the right size school, because we need to do something in order to manage the rest of the enrollment.
Got it. Okay.
That makes sense.
All right, so we now know what the total capacity is. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into when things are happening across the next 10 years and exactly what those markers are. This takes the enrollment projections from the demographer and lays it out for you for each school. And you can see the purple line at the top there is your capacity, and the orange bars show you the ups and downs. And in the high school, you're going to be pretty even. You're bumping up. I think your peak enrollment is 902 students in the year 2029. So if we keep going here, in Thurston, the purple line is your capacity, but the blue line shows what you would need to show the MSBA, because you cannot count the modular classrooms when you're talking about capacity. They don't view modular classrooms as being countable because they have a limited lifespan. 25 years is about the limited lifespan of modulars. So in the year 2031, you're hitting your peak of 753 students at Thurston School. In order to keep the classroom size of 23 students per class, by year 2033, you'll need 5 additional classrooms in that school.
Do you know how many modulars we have currently at Thurston and like roughly how old they are?
Do you want to answer that?
I'd say, I mean, if you're counting the cafeteria annex, then 3, but there's 2 that are based on classroom additions.
One of them is 2001.
years.
One of them
2001.
is 2009.
2009. Yeah.
Okay.
So 24 years and 16 years respectively, for what should be a 20-year temporary construction.
Okay.
So they include the cafeteria, and they also, 13 classrooms, I believe, one of them being a special ed classroom.
And I don't know if you would be able, I don't know who's the best person. So, and you said the MSBA does not count
When
modulars.
Correct.
Okay,
Because they're not a permanent solution to solving your capacity needs.
that makes sense. Okay.
But what's the implication of that, I guess? If they're not including the modules?
So if we submitted a statement of interest, it would show we were way over capacity.
Okay,
We would have to report the blue line.
got it.
Not the purple line.
Right.
Does that impact funding or anything, or no?
I think it's a better story
It's a better story.
to get into the
Right.
program.
And the age of the modulars
Got it, okay,
plays
thank
into
you.
that story as well. So you're looking at needing to repair or replace those modulars in the very near future.
Right, okay.
Because they're reaching the end of their life.
Which, was it the older one that needed the new roof right away?
No, it's actually the newer one,
Okay.
which is ironic. So it's just the quality of the installation on that particular modular.
Yeah.
So
Can I
it failed sooner.
ask you to, for the audience, explain why we're talking so much about the MSBA and why it's important for us to
Sure.
talk about the MSBA in the context of this conversation?
Sure.
Is that helpful? Okay.
Yep.
So from our perspective, we use them as a guideline. The MSBA provides us with great guidelines. They've done a lot of studies throughout the years to determine what the right size of classroom is, what's the right size of building for an enrollment size. And so for us to use that as a benchmark, it gives a level playing field across the board. It gives us something to measure against so that we're not always changing based on your enrollment per class. And you might have 19 or 24 students per classroom, but the MSBA gives us that benchline so that we can measure it across the board evenly. The other part is the funding. So if we're talking about MSBA rules and regulations, if you're going to be asking them to be your partner in funding, you're going to be needing to meet their guidelines.
Thank you.
If you fund by yourself, you can fund by yourself.
By the numbers that we're looking at in this report are different from the school committee guidelines for classrooms.
They are, yes. Yep.
Because we're using MSBA ones.
Correct. Correct. So you might decide it's okay to have 30 kids in a classroom, but the MSBA guideline.
That's not the plan, by the way, for
Right.
anybody who's watching. So.
The MSBA would say, no, that's not what we're doing. And so when we get into the options, which we'll show you, those options are also designed around the MSBA guidelines, so that you would know approximately how big the buildings would be. Right, any questions about Thurston, if we move on? So we'll go a little bit quicker through the elementary schools. As we've said, they all will be over capacity by 2033. It's just when do they hit that capacity line, and when does it become a point of not being able to put students into those classrooms. So in 2029, you would go from 18 students in a classroom, in a kindergarten classroom, to 20, and you would have 25 students, not 23 students, in a grade 1 through 5. But by 2033, you would need at least 1 additional kindergarten class and 2 additional 1 through 5 classrooms. And Martha Jones, very similar arrangement here. 26 students would have to be in a classroom in the year 2028 if you do not add modulars prior to that, or classrooms prior to that, sorry. And by 2033, you would need 3 additional classrooms for grades 1 through 5. It's lots of math, so tell me if I'm going too fast. In Pine Hill, again, you can see that you have this capacity here, and your enrollment is actually going down, so this is the relief valve for many of your immediate decisions. In Sheen, the enrollment will be 20, you'll need to increase classroom size for kindergartens to 20 students in 2030. And by 2033, you'll have 391 students. So you'll need an additional kindergarten classroom and one additional 1 through 5 classroom. And across the district, again, you can see that we're bumping right up against that capacity level in the elementary schools. And going back to, you do like to have this be closer to 90% at capacity so that you can be flexible with where students are and address any bubbles in grades. All right. Any questions about capacity and enrollment, other than a little bit deeper dive into the other one? Okay. So potential solutions. We looked at 6 potential solutions, and I want to start with, this is not the full array of solutions. Within each one of these solutions, there is another nuance to every one of these. This is just a bigger picture and a way to be able to get to a solution that might address many of the problems. So we always start with what we call the status quo, or the do nothing or do maintenance only, because we need a benchmark. If you were to do capital improvements only across the board, what does that look like? So that would be option number 1. It would not change the number of classroom counts that you have, so you would not be increasing the capacity across your program, across your elementary schools. You would not be addressing any of those spaces that are undersized at any of those elementary schools. You would be taking care of your 10-year capital improvement and maintenance program. And the same is true at the middle school level. You would not be addressing your classroom count or the undersized spaces. And if you remember, Thurston has 68% of their spaces are undersized for the current programs. In option 2, we said, well, what's the next least thing that we could do? And that would be to go and what we call right size every school by adding modulars. Right? This is sort of the quick fix for most districts is let's go add space. So what does that do for you? It does increase your classroom count for both your middle school and your elementary schools, but it does not change those spaces that are currently undersized in any of those buildings.
Like cafeteria, gym, that sort of space?
Exactly. Cafeteria, gym, kindergarten classrooms, any of those spaces that we had
Right.
undersized, it would not address any of those. It does take care of all your capital improvement and maintenance in a 10-year window. In option 3, we said, well, what if we built a new Thurston school and added modulars to the other elementary schools? How would that help us? And so you can see that if you built a new Thurston school, you would check all your boxes for middle school, and you would check your classroom count because you've added modulars at each of the elementary schools, but you again have not addressed any of those space needs. And then what if you were to build a new elementary school and maybe combine it with Martha Jones, and that would address all of your classroom counts across the district for elementary level, but it wouldn't fix any of your program space at the middle school. And then we decided, let's think a little bit outside the box. So thinking a little bit outside the box, what if we did the new Thurston school, but then we redistrict everybody? So we could reduce the number of modulars going at the elementary schools, we redistrict, we fill up the capacity at the Pine Hill and sort of level things out. Well, that helps quite a bit, but it does not change the program spaces for those classrooms that are undersized at the elementary school, or allow that flexibility for those spaces. And then one more thinking outside the box, well, what if we moved 5th grade into the middle school and created a brand new middle school that was 5 through 8, and we changed the elementary schools to be K through 4. How does that help us? And when you think about that, that gives you a breadth of space at the elementary school levels, and it gives you a brand new middle school so that you're addressing 5 through 8 program needs.
And we closed Sheehan.
You would close Sheehan because you would build a school big enough to handle Sheehan and Martha Jones in that option.
And you would take the K through 4 from Sheehan and spread it out.
across those classrooms. Wait a minute, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you need to do a wholesale redistricting with that because you still have you want to fill up the capacity at Pine Hill, you have overages at Downey, right? So you'd have to look at lines regardless in that scenario.
And if you think about the enrollment projections that I showed you for Martha Jones, you would actually need modulars at Martha Jones before you would even be able to bring a new school online. So you would still have that modular or classroom addition at Martha Jones.
And the modulars at Martha Jones would be the permanent solution.
Yes, or
Or-
an addition. It could be a
Or-
small addition or modulars, depending on what your next step after would be.
And in option 5, again, the modulars or addition would be the permanent solution at Martha Jones. But for all of these, with the exception of 4 Martha Jones, all of these modulars would be permanent modulars.
Well, in option 4, we're saying that they're temporary because in option 4, Martha Jones would eventually move over to a brand-new building.
Right, just temporary at Martha Jones, though. Thurston and Downey would be permanent.
Correct. Correct.
Martha, with redistricting, we would still need a permanent module at Martha Jones, or would it be temporary while we finish building the K through, or the
For
5
option
through
6,
8?
it would
6,
need to
yeah.
be permanent because of the way that the kindergarten numbers are lower, because your class numbers are smaller for kindergarten than
Yeah.
the 18 versus the 23. So you would still need 2 classrooms over at Martha Jones. So it could be a small addition or it could be modulars.
So if I can interject here for a second, and I think this is where this gets really sort of tricky from a numbers perspective, right? As Michelle mentioned, the slide that talks about using these numbers for MSBA guidelines for class size. So for example, the MSBA uses 18 as our cap in kindergarten. Here, our school committee policy is 22, right? So that may or may not, and again, you identify this as you go out and you do new enrollment projections, that, by the time you have to make that decision, which is a couple of years from now, and I'll talk about those slides a little bit later on, that may or may not come to fruition. Okay. But right now, based upon the information we have right now and based upon those comparative MSBA guidelines, so we're comparing apples to apples across all 6 options, that's why it's there.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
And for option 5 and 6, when we're talking about redistricting, it's the entire district would be
Yes.
impacted.
For elementary.
For elementary,
yeah.
yes, for elementary, yeah.
Nowhere else to go for those middle schoolers.
Everyone goes to the middle school.
Right.
Can I ask a question? I'm trying to figure this out, and I think you'll be able to just answer it faster. So 3 and 5 kind of seem like they're saying the same thing, except that we're redistricting K through 5. Can you just, because the outcome is that all the green boxes are checked except for elementary school program space. So what's the big differentiator kind of driving the redistricting there?
So what we did was we sort of took status quo, nothing, add modulars, keep that same program, but build a new school, keep that same program, but do this. So we
So
just
it's
kept
less
going down.
modulars.
Right, so we didn't do the redistricting until we got to option 5. So
And you
could do
need the
that. I mean,
modulars in
Right.
3
Right.
because you're
They're
not
staying there.
redistricting.
Right.
So it's just a way of keeping everything,
Like build a
looking
layer
at,
of build.
like I said, every one of these could be nuanced a little bit more, but it's one way of keeping them all,
Right.
comparing one to the next.
So can I ask some questions? So 4, that was a little surprising. Is there a 4B of just doing a new Sheehan and not, Martha Jones came out okay in the assessment, so why replace Martha Jones, given that the useful life it's not at the end of its useful life?
Because you'd close Martha Jones in 4.
In 4, you would build a school big enough to close the Martha Jones and the Sheen.
I understand that, but why not do something that's more cost affordable of a new 3-section Sheehan, for example?
I think when you look at projecting the enrollment going forward, what we've looked at is that you would meet the enrollment in 10 years, but what we don't know is what happens after that. So if you were to continue to think about enrollment going up, you may need a bigger school to handle the future projected enrollment beyond our 10-year forecast.
Well, so are we looking for 10 years or are we looking beyond 10 years, I guess is my question.
You're at 10, so if you were to do option 4, you would build a school that would be able to serve both Sheehan and Martha Jones. And that would give you the capacity to serve that enrollment for both schools, but it also gives you a little bit of extra room because now you're working within about 90% of capacity.
But there's a cost to that. I mean, we have to be cognizant of
Yeah,
taxpayers.
so to add, and again, maybe I should have put the timeline slides a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
bit earlier, right? So to preview what you'll see in a little bit. So if Sheehan is identified as the preferred option for what we move forward with, you then go through a feasibility phase for Sheehan, and you identify a preferred option for Sheehan/MJ by the end of 2028, beginning of 2029. In that meantime, you've done new enrollment projections that from in 2027, 2028, that take you out to 2038, and you have a better sense of how to, because you can explore both of those options of feasibility.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Second question, we've been talking about preschool capacity for about as long as I've been on school committee. Did you talk about that in the conversation? Where would that fit in? Because this doesn't solve for a big gap in the number of classrooms we need for preschool.
So the preschool, we have been analyzing that as well. It's a little bit more nuanced. We understand, like you can only, right now your preschool is at capacity because you're limited by the space that you have and those number of students. So we know that you would benefit from having an additional or 2 additional classrooms for preschool. And that has not been factored into this piece here.
Yeah, so I can add a little more flavor to this. There are some solutions for preschool that may involve some things related to municipal projects in town, and we can't get ahead of that in this presentation before the municipal side has done their master plan release.
Very intriguing.
But we haven't forgotten about preschool. That's the important highlight there.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then let me understand the elementary school program space. So Downey, for example, Downey, there'll be classrooms that are undersized, so it doesn't solve for all elementary. Am I not understanding that elementary school program space correctly?
Under which option?
So any options? I mean, Downey, we're not doing anything to classroom size, and your slides show that some of those classrooms were undersized.
Correct.
For MSBA.
Yep.
So I guess I'm just trying to understand.
In
the green-
4, for example.
Yeah, why is that green?
It's green in 4.
It's green and 4 because you would be adding modulars, and so you would be able to move the function of the different classrooms into. So in 4, you might, or you would likely do 4 kindergarten-sized classrooms, which would allow your kindergarten classrooms to become general classrooms because that's the size that they are.
And that gets you above the
And
percentage.
that would help the percentage that you have there of undersized classrooms.
But you would still have some undersized classes.
You would still
Yeah,
have some,
okay.
but you have the ability now to move things around and change the function of those spaces.
Got it, okay.
In 3, and I know we're not getting into the merits of them yet, but what's striking me in 3 is that we're adding modulars at Downey, Martha Jones, and Sheehan, but the slide before said we have huge capacity at Pine Hill.
That's because you're not redistricting in 3.
I know,
You don't
but I'm
redistrict
just
until you
thinking,
get
like,
to-
how is that, that just seems like a
But like I
colossal waste of.
said, of an option, right?
You may be previewing some of the conversation we may be having with the community. or
I mean,
something.
that doesn't make any sense.
From 1 to 3, 1 to 4, we have left your catchment areas to be exactly the same. And then we start saying, okay, well, now we're going to move your catchment areas and fill up
Yeah.
your elementary schools.
Okay.
It's just a way of comparing, you're adding just one thing to each option so that you can begin to compare along the lines.
So I feel like, I mean, everything except for status quo helps classroom count, which I think is great. When you went over the past couple slides with program space, where were we sort of worst on that? You know what I mean? Like, where were we falling with that in terms of timeline? I just can't remember along the 10 years when we were going to kind of hit a tipping point.
I'm sorry.
For
which-
program space, in that it looks like there's 2 options that alleviate that for elementary and then 2 for the middle school. So I'm just wondering,
At which
program
point
space,
we-
that's like your cafeterias, your gyms, where we're going to be kind of crowded in the shared use space, is that? right?
I think it's the size of the classroom, not the kids in it. So so you have the program space
Okay.
issue on day one because every kindergarten you have is too small.
Right.
So it's not really it's not going to be along the timeline because it's not an enrollment
Got
issue.
it. Okay.
It's like how you
square
built
footage.
the
How you built
building.
it.
Yeah, the footprint of the school is not going to change.
Right.
And the size of those classrooms, we cannot
Right.
change.
Oh, sorry.
You are quick.
All right.
I don't know what's going on
Wow.
with this machine here, so, yeah.
All right, so this is a test fit. So again, all these caveats. This is not a final design. This is, do the classrooms that we have identified for each of these options fit on each of these sites? And yes, you have to give up something in order to get these classrooms as modulars onto each site. So if we look at Downey, a 4 modular classroom, the best place to put it would be at the end of an existing corridor, and we chose the left-hand side of this building over the right-hand side because the right-hand side would divide the playground in half. Over here on the left-hand side, you're going to be giving up some hardscape play area, and there is a transition between the front of the building, and where that site is. Also, you can see if you were to build this, which is kindergarten classroom size plus bathrooms, you would be extending into that current drive aisle a little bit there. And so there would have to be some manipulation of this on that site. So
For like fire safety.
yes, we'd have to, there's some, whether or not the fire safety could go around the building, or whether that drive aisle is actually needed, or could you get the lawnmower into the baseball field from the other side? Those are things that you'd have to look at as you begin to plan what this modular configuration actually is. At Martha Jones, it would sit pretty much in the front of the building, and you can see that we've separated it away from the building by quite a bit, and that's to assure that there's daylight getting into those classrooms, so that we don't want it right up against the building. There's a classroom right there at the end. And so you would have this little walkway to get to it. But again, we looked at putting kindergarten classrooms with bathrooms onto this site as well.
Is that envisioned as a covered walkway?
Enclosed.
Oh,
Yep.
enclosed.
So in both Downey and Martha Jones, you would have connected modular classrooms to the main building. You will see that that connection does not exist in the next one, in Sheen, because Sheen does not have a sprinkler system in the building. So we cannot increase the size of that building. So in this case, it would be an independent building. And whether you chose that to be kindergartner kids or older children would be up to programming. But those children would have to go back and forth to get to art, music, gym.
Outside.
Outside.
And it can't be connected at all, not even with like a cover?
Could you do a breezeway?
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
The code consultant here. You would have to have a discussion with the building department.
Okay.
So there's obviously all sorts of inherent safety risks, particularly with that Sheehan option. But what about the modulars at the other ones, at like Downey and MJ? I know the district has worked really hard to enhance safety and have protocols with people entering the building and everything. So do the modulars change that at all, or are there ways, would people be able to access?
No, I would think that your access protocol would remain the same, that all doors are locked or keyed and fobbed, that people must go through the main entrance.
But Sheehan, obviously, that would be very different.
There are protocols that you could put in place there too, so that the doors are fobbed and locked, and that, students have to move back and forth with teachers, depending on how you move forward with that.
Michelle, can you say a little bit about some of the kind of limitations, maybe education limitations or physical space limitations by using modulars generally, on these sites?
The spaces that you're losing,
Both the
Or-
spaces we're losing, but
or
also
the spaces
kind
that
of
you
the-
gain.
Are there limitations in what we can offer from an education perspective by using modulars versus, other options, some of the other options we've talked about?
Like a permanent building? Is that- Obviously, if you could, I would go with a permanent building or, permanent classrooms at each of these. To do that for every building, I'm sure would be outside of your financial range. But when we're talking about modulars, they're a very good solution to an immediate problem, right? So you will have, if you remember those graphs, you will have a problem in the very near future for many of these elementary schools. The enrollment is creeping up, and at some point, you're going to be exceeding even your own limits for classroom sizes. So the nice thing about modulars is they're quick and they can solve your problem quickly. They have a limited lifespan, so they're not a permanent solution. And you can see that in many ways they separate the students from the rest of the school. And I always think about this, especially at Thurston, you have grade 6 on one side in these modulars over here and grade 6 on the other side in these modulars over here. And so those two groups of students are not connected. You would have that same issue in these schools here. So if you put a whole grade level in a modular grade grouping, they're not as connected to the rest of the school as the other students. So there are pros and cons. The other cons about these here are you're giving up play space, right? In Martha Jones, you're giving up some play space out front of the building, but in Sheen, you're giving up that circle, which I also think is used as an emergency turnaround circle. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
That's good.
there are pros and cons to each of these, right? On Thurston, the other difficulty over here with the Thurston modules, first of all, you need more of them. Second, they are, again, separating a group of students from the main part of the building, but they're also interfering with the multi-purpose playfield out there. So that field could not be used for the same capacity that it's being used right now, which I believe is mostly soccer.
I don't think it's a multi-purpose, it's just a grass field. The multi-purpose is on the other side,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and at Sheehan, I think that's actually playground for the, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen,
It's a
but for the
hardscape playground.
younger
There's like
students.
Foursquare and
Yeah,
Yep.
basketball hoops
Yep.
and things like that.
Michelle, the land behind Thurston, that field space, is that town-owned or is that district-owned?
So it's noted as part of the high school fields.
Okay, okay.
So. All right, so then we went and looked to see how big a new school to fit the number of students that you would need would be and how that might work. And again, this is not a design, this is a test fit. We took the number of classrooms and the spaces that would be needed for a Thurston school and laid it out on the adjacent field, and then looked at how you might solve the parking situation and the replacement of that ball field that is there. This option we would look at as both a 6 through 8 option, which would have an academic wing of 3 stories, and a 5 through 8, which would be 4 stories. So the same footprint, but both options would be resolved with this.
And the white is parking?
Yes.
And you identified parking as a issue at Thurston, right?
It is an issue at Thurston.
I mean, I think everyone.
Parking
We didn't
is-
need that.
I just want to call it out.
Just site circulation in general is an issue over at Thurston.
If I can just add one thing around this test fit too, and this came out of some of our educational visioning work. A 6 to 8, we think we all know what a 6 to 8 middle school looks like. In the 5 to 8 option, it would be, you'd explore in feasibility as sort of a consolidated 5-8 middle school versus a 5-6 upper elementary and a 7-8 middle school co-located on the same site. Both of those could be potential options for how you look at that grade configuration.
So you could hypothetically have like a 5-6 wing and a 7-8 wing, and you have a shared auditorium and a shared gym space and cafeteria space?
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but that dotted line sort of through the middle of the top of that shows how you could do that differentiation.
I see.
Yeah, and this is actually just one plan. You could do almost the butterfly plan where the academic wings are split with all the core in between, and you'd have 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, there's lots of options. Again, not a design. It's really to get us to a footprint that works on the site and an approximate building size that we could go and get a cost estimate for.
Can you explain to residents why we can't push it back further on the site?
Yeah, there is a gas main that runs right through the middle of this. Oh, here. You gave me a pointer for a reason, right? There's a gas main that runs right through the middle of this site back here. So you would not be able to push the building back there.
Tim, when you think about, I don't know how much you've thought about, I'm sure you have, a 5, 6, 7, 8 solution, would you envision, how do you, well, maybe we're too early for this, but how do you think the education would change for that 5th grade experience?
Yeah. It's way too early to answer that question. It's not too early to think about that question.
Yeah.
And I think, again, when I talk through the timeline, that kind of a decision about grade configuration wouldn't need to be made until the end of feasibility in late 2028, early 2029. And I think part of that would be going and visiting other districts that have 5 through 8 models, or whether it's a co-located 5, 6, 7, 8 model, getting some ideas. You'd obviously want to have a whole lot of conversation with staff, with families, with students around what their experiences are and how you do that. I think there are, let me not answer that question too much because I don't want to put something on the record right now without with doing some of that.
But we would explore those options thoughtfully and.
Yeah, so I will say this only as a for instance, right? So one thing that you might find in 5th grade, because right now we have 1 teacher, 1 classroom in elementary school, we have 4 teachers, 4 classrooms in a team model in 6 through 8. One 5th grade scenario would be a 2-person team. You could look at something like that as a transition from the elementary level to the middle school level. I know some districts do that. That would be the kind of thing that we would explore, but there'd be a whole lot of time to have that conversation.
Okay.
How does this, I mean, I'm just curious, does that seem tight? I mean, I'm just looking at the visual, maybe because it's all kind of pushed, is that, I know it fits theoretically, but how does it feel?
Well, you
You're
know,
an expert, so.
So what's
green
making it
square.
feel, what's making it feel tight is the square, which is indicating that we're replacing the ball field.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But that square would actually be a ball field, right?
No, I know, I
It's
just
not
mean,
even-
I just mean the
Right.
building itself, and the traffic flow and all that.
I think, so the traffic flow, I think, works better than what you
Okay, wow,
have.
that's-
Like, you could
that's
actually
probably
have a large queue line and a
Yeah.
drop-off zone. You could
Yeah.
have a bus loop. You could have a delivery area that's completely separated from the students and the drop-off zone. So I think site circulation would be drastically improved. It is tucked behind your COA, so it's, getting to it is a little bit different than, just coming up to the building. And again, this is just one option. And this was placed far to the right so that you could still operate the existing school. It could actually go a little bit closer to the left and give yourself a little bit more room. But there's lots of options to explore if you choose. So again, when you choose the project or when you go forward, you would be choosing a school, not a project. And you're telling the MSBA, here are my problems, not here's my solution.
Yeah.
So that's really important. So when you go forward, this may not be anything close to what you come out with. It's just, we know that this is the space that it could work in because you don't have other spaces in town. And then we did a test fit for a new combined Martha Jones and Sheen School on this site. And we understand this is not school-owned land back here, so there is some coordination that has to happen with the town. But if you were able to build a school, this literally is taking the Pine Hill model and placing it here. I don't think that's what you would do. You would build a school specifically designed for this site. But this was to show you that you could get a school here that would fit the number of students that you would need and replace the fields. And you would be able to do that while you still have an occupied school on the site. So you're far enough away from it.
2 stories, similar to Pine Hill.
Yeah, this is exactly the Pine Hill
Exactly,
model.
okay.
It would, to do the combined school, you would need, I think I said 2 additional kindergarten classrooms and a couple of additional general classrooms. So slightly bigger, but pretty much the same size
Right.
for everything else. Your gym, your cafeteria, all of those would be the same size. All right, the big reveal. Drum roll. I was gonna say, before, like my caveats here. Rough order of magnitudes. So when we see these numbers, they are rough order of magnitudes, and what that means is that they are big picture cost estimates. They are not project estimates. And again, there's lots of nuances that go into these, but they're really to give you a comparative analysis for each of those options. So we're comparing the status quo, the do nothing or capital improvements only, to all the other options. And so that you can actually weigh, is it better to just fix what we have? Is it better to just add classrooms? Is it better to go with a K through 5, or is it better to do something else? Like, this allows you to look at that in a big picture way. These numbers will continue to change, but they are within the ballpark of what you would see for this option. Okay, now we can do the big reveal. And I know all of you are going right to that middle line, so we'll start there. You can see that the range is about 200 to 300 million, goes right across. Your status quo and your add modulars are not that far apart, so solving those problems could be done within, that order of magnitude there. When we look at option 5 and 6, you're looking at roughly the same costs, so it's important to understand which one solves more problems for you. And then when we look at the new kindergarten, the K through 5 school versus a middle school is really where you're probably looking at those numbers. Which one solves more problems and which one is more financially within your realm. So, with the big reveal, do you want to go? Okay, go to the next one. So how those numbers actually break down is capital improvement and maintenance across the board is, you can see those numbers. The reason why they change in each option is because if you are going to build a new building, you're not going to be maintaining that building for 10 years. You're going to pretty much stop the capital, you're going to maintain, but you're not going to put capital investments into that building if you know it's coming offline. So when we did these cost estimates, we carried the capital improvements to about the time when you would decide that you would be moving forward, or close to the start of construction, about the 5-year mark for each of those.
The capital improvement numbers, clearly super high. Those numbers, that's the total that you're recommending, but is not necessarily what we would actually do, correct? Because there's things in there that are long-term, there's things in there that might be nice to have, but we wouldn't necessarily do. I'm just trying, because we have $1 million a year budget for capital, which isn't going to get us to these numbers. Right. So I'm just trying to frame that first line in reality.
So that first line is capital improvement and maintenance for 10 years for all your buildings. And what I've done is, even if something you didn't need to fix it for 12 years, it still falls within our need to fix within 10 years, because that's the limits of our study. So all of those are baked into this. So this is all your needs, 10 years, every building,
right? But even
everything you could want to fix.
So even within, let's take number 5, right? That's $13 million a year. We would not spend 13. We just won't. We're not going to spend $13 million. So are there things in there that we would say we don't want to do this? Meaning, I think that's where this number is misleading, right? I think that first line is misleading because it's sort of saying, it's reading like you have to spend $13 million a year, when I think it's more like you have to spend some much lower number to get to a realistic.
I agree. I think it would be helpful if we were able to break that down and have kind of must-dos and nice-to-haves, and have 2 separate numbers. That would be helpful in terms of decision.
So these numbers reflect, if you remember, an hour ago, we talked about that spread, the report where all the issues are identified, and then the recommendations to fix those. This is everything that was in that list.
And you,
And those are, and again, those are the escalated costs, right? So that's the other piece to remember too, is that you're talking about $1 million now, but 10 years from now, you're going to need more than $1 million to maintain the same thing that you're maintaining now. So those include the escalated costs.
and you had said there were trigger points too, like if we spent a certain amount, right, you say it triggers a requirement to
Yes.
spend more at
Yes.
certain points as well?
Do we have a, we
It's
have a
on the
slide?
next slide, I believe.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
we do have another slide about the triggers. Yep, we'll get to that in just a moment. The modulars changed by what you need across the board for each of the modulars, and then you're looking at the new school costs, a 6 through 8 versus K through 5 versus the 6 through 8 is the same versus a 5 through 8 school.
If I can add one, sorry, if you want to go ahead first.
Go ahead.
In terms of the CIP list, I think one way to think about it, again, it is an itemization of literally everything in that building that would be better if we were able to fix it, right? And so I think a lot of the value in this is about comparing across the columns, because if you are taking a building offline, what is both the current and long-term liability that you're removing, or if you are doing something else to address the situation. So this is why, when Michelle talked about there being rough order of magnitude, I think that's important. But and you'll see this on the next slide, actually, where we pull this out specifically for Thurston and then MJ and Sheehan. It's about that comparative cost amount. I think to your point, right, so I think the one that probably stands out the most is to do a whole full-scale HVAC replacement at the high school to the most energy efficient model possible.
Right.
Like that would be, in an ideal world, that's the hit the lottery ticket way that we would address that. While there are certainly HVAC issues here at the high school, and we know that, that level of solution is probably not the path that we would take, certainly within the next 10 years, because there are other pressing priorities. So that CIP list, that identification of short-term, mid-term, long-term, is about how do we take the things that we need to do. Anything on the short-term list should be ahead of anything on the mid-term list. And then we layer on available funding both through free cash and through what we would prioritize for separate warrant articles, whether that's through free cash or borrowing at town meeting in the future.
Yeah, I think to Amanda's point, it'd be helpful to have that prior, what's really, we're gonna have to replace roofs. I get some stuff we're just gonna have to do. Getting some sense of that, if it's under any of these options, like what's realistic over the next 10 years.
And for number 4, is the reason it's so much more than like Pine Hill, because you said you just took Pine Hill and put it at the, Sheehan property, because of the cost escalations?
Yes.
Combined with that, I don't want to say inflated, but potentially inflated CIP costs for the whole district. So that could actually be less.
So you're talking about the new school, the cost of the new school?
Yes.
So that's the cost of Pine Hill escalated.
The 155.
The 132.
132.
And then would have to do the 7 million for the modulars.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay, so that would bring us up to, let's say, 140. And then we have the 168, which is the maintenance across the district, which
So
is
the
probably
maintenance in that
less.
one is, you're doing all your 10-year capital improvement on Thurston, which is a huge, the
that's-
capital improvement on Thurston is fully in that
So
number.
that's why that's so high. Okay.
And that's high because the needs at Thurston are so
Correct.
great.
So if you look at the next one where you're.
Let's just go to the slide, this may be helpful.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, can you flip back to
Yeah,
the
sure.
other one? I think what this slide does help you do, even if that first line is inflated, it sort of helps you see where your dollars are going,
Right.
right? So in slide 6, we're putting the most money into a new building as opposed to into capital projects. Whereas slide 4, it's the opposite, right? You're putting more money into the capital and less money into the new school. So I think for those purposes, this is and you're putting more money into the modular. So I think for that way, this slide is helpful. I think that first CIP line is misleading.
Can I ask though, is that intent of that first line to be like worst case scenario for us? Like
It's all in.
all in?
It's
right?
all in,
Like
everything
best
that you would
case,
need to
right?
do, capital improvement and
Best
maintenance.
case, financially
wish
worst
list.
case.
Yeah.
Financially worst
Okay.
case.
Yeah. but that we.
Yeah, that's
we'd have
why I
some
think,
wiggle
I
room.
think
Yeah.
if we use it as a comparative tool
Yep.
as opposed to like an actual number.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing that's baked into those numbers is those are project costs as if you were going to go out and bid every single line item.
Right.
They are not projects as if you put them together and you put it on the street or you do work in-house. I mean, this includes like, if I'm gonna replace 10 ceiling tiles, that's, you know, that's a project cost that got soft costs added to it, where you could just do some of that in-house. So this is our way of comparing a line item all the way across and then making sure that we are comfortable within those realms.
Thank you.
It's a lot, I know. This is why I talk about rough order of magnitudes, right? They're comparative costs, you know, we should not be on the dollars.
And
Go ahead. You can go to the next one, I think.
about how much or what percentage or what could we expect from the MSBA if we're accepted? Just, who knows?
What I would, I mean, May, you can
Yeah.
chime in on this.
Yeah.
I understand Michelle's hesitation to answer this question. I would say, like, you can think about an effective reimbursement rate of roughly about 20% of the building cost.
I mean, that's what we got for Pine Hill.
Yeah. Okay.
So the actual rate was like 39%, but they exclude a number of your costs. Like a number of your costs are not eligible for reimbursement. So the net rate for Pine Hill ended up being about 20%.
Okay.
So in that new school line,
Yeah.
so not only could we possibly take some of the CIP dollars down, and we likely would, if we went with any of the new school builds,
And we got into the MSBA.
if we got into the MSBA, we could expect that to come down.
Yeah.
We could hope that
Yeah.
they come down by 20% or so.
And we would, I mean, we wouldn't even be in a feasibility phase unless we're in the MSBA.
Right.
So we would know, and I think we know fairly early on what our total reimbursement rate is. And, you know, I think they give that to you fairly early in the process, so.
Another question related to the MSBA. My understanding is the reason that the project timeline is so far out is because of the MSBA's likely timelines. So if we weren't accepted or for whatever reason didn't go with the MSBA for funding, how would that impact the timeline of the project?
Can we put a pin in that question? Because there is a timeline slide a little bit later.
Sure, thank you.
We're getting close to the end here, so we're doing good. Whoops.
There it is.
Okay, so this is where we talked about those triggers that you mentioned before, where if we reach a certain amount of capital improvement, we would trigger other things. So when we look at these options, if you were to choose a Thurston school as a new school, you would want to manage those capital improvements for those years that you're still having Thurston online in order not to trigger this $2.9 million for accessibility. So that would affect that capital investment that you're looking at once you choose that option. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you're saying that if we were to be investing in capital improvement at more than 2.9 per year at Thurston, we would have to address some of the accessibility issues
Right.
at Thurston.
Correct.
So we'd want to be keeping that under that 2.9 or 8.7 in a three-year period.
If you knew that you were taking that building offline in 5 or 6, 7 years, you want to make sure that you're not investing capital in that building beyond what you need to maintain the building.
And
make it
Michelle, is
safe
that
for students.
reflected in the CIP options of the previous?
It is,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And so then the other trigger for the other schools, and then the issue with Sheehan is the fire protection trigger is at 5.2. So that's why you can't attach the building. One, you exceed the square footage, and two, you would trigger this, which would require capital investment beyond.
Can you, I don't
Immediate
know
needs.
if we know, can you remind us of the ages? When was Thurston and Sheehan built?
Thurston's 1939, the oldest section, and Sheehan's 1948.
1948. Okay, I thought it was older.
Roosevelt and Truman, as you say.
Yeah. I say Depression era in Truman, but yeah.
Oh, even better.
I would just say, Michelle, two things about this. The accessibility improvements that would be triggered, are those included in the CIP?
Yes.
So kind of to your point about like the CIP being the all-in, everything you'd like to have done, it includes all of the accessibility
Yes.
improvements, potentially like an elevator
Yes,
in buildings that don't have one now.
which you wouldn't
So-
do if you,
So those are things we have not done by choice in recent years, right? But they're included in those big numbers that we saw. And at the same time, if we didn't want to do them, we'd have to be staying within that 2.9, for example, at Thurston per year, which actually would really slow down our ability to tackle big improvements.
Right.
Because if the full cost is 73.9, doing it at the rate of 2.9 per year means you're not going to really get to that 73 very fast.
Oh, right, that makes sense.
So there's like a dilemma there, right?
right. All right, here's the timeline. So this assumes that you would submit a statement of interest, again, for a building, not a solution, to the MSBA. Statement of interest is SOI. This in April of 2026, and you can see that you would not actually get into a building until probably September of 2032, and that assumes that you would be invited into eligibility in your first attempt. So within that first year, you would be accepted. And
Because between 26 and 28, they're doing feasibility and design. No,
so if you submit in April, you generally would know in January of 27 that you
Okay.
you would hire your team. You would go through, you'd go through your eligibility and you would hire your team and you would bring on your designers in 2028. So that period of time is getting all your funding together, getting your teams together, and doing all the MSBA work that needs to happen. And then you start design, and it takes from 28 to 30 before you can start construction.
I heard you say, assuming you get in on your first try. Does that imply that the fact that we have applied a couple of times for Sheehan, could that work to our benefit? Because it wouldn't be our first try? Does that make any sense?
So let me respond to this one, because
Absolutely.
yeah, because Michelle also works with other districts beyond ours,
Okay.
and so I want to speak about Westwood context here. A couple of things will work in our favor when we submit to the MSBA. One will be the fact that we actually have a fully developed master plan with options, which shows that we're not thinking about this in response to sort of a one-off project. Two is the fact that we have a successful track record working with the MSBA in opening Pine Hill. That is certainly going to work to our advantage as well too, because the MSBA is particularly interested in investing in communities that can actually get a project across the finish line at the back end. So that is really helpful. And I think three, the fact that we've submitted previously for Sheehan has certainly indicated to them and has shown that we have a desire to do something. But if by now and April of 2026, and I'll talk about our timeline in the following slides about this, if we have done all of that community outreach and talk about the components of our plan, and we have something that shows that the decision this committee makes in submitting an SOI is done with a level of community support, that goes a long way, again, in terms of adding heft to the SOI submission that hopefully puts us in good stead in April of 26.
Thank you.
But there's only so many, I mean, I don't really,
Yeah.
there's only, they say no to more than they say yes to.
No, that is true,
You should
right?
just be- I mean, you just have to be transparent.
Yeah, no, yeah, and you're right. I mean, you're 100% right on that, right? And I will say that one of the things that works against us is the fact that they do want to make sure that they distribute across the Commonwealth in terms of what they fund. What works against us is our socioeconomics as a community is not does not necessarily work in our favor in that regard, but our low reimbursement rate probably does work in our favor because they have to spend less on a school here than they would on a school in another community, right? So there's a mix and match as it relates to that.
But yes, it's tough to get into
Yeah.
the program.
But didn't we just see Needham
We
got a
did.
build, and then they got another build almost immediately after?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's not unheard of
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
in succession.
I think we've been doing questions along the way. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to stay up there, and I'm just going to transition back to just to talk a little bit more.
Stay.
Well, there may be more questions, sorry.
So much.
So let's talk about our key decision points in our timeline as a community here. So the first key decision is driven by that SOI deadline. And so that identifies the school that we select as our top priority. And not to presuppose, but it's either going to be Sheehan or Thurston.
Right.
I can't imagine we're going to I appreciate the laughter in the audience. But I would, either Sheehan or Thurston will be identified as the top priority. And the target deadline for that submission is April of 2026, which means realistically we need to identify that school by the end of this calendar year. Because once that's identified, then we need to go through completing the work to be a statement of interest. That's laying out what we've done, how it fits in with our master plan, what are the problems we're trying to partner with the MSBA to solve. And that SOI needs to be approved by both the school committee and the select board before it's submitted to the MSBA. So that is really the first decision point. And if we go back to those various options, if we identify a Sheehan, that puts us on that option 4 track. But within that, I think to your point, Tony, there are nuances about, is it a standalone Sheehan? Is it a combined Sheehan MJ? That doesn't need to be decided by the end of this calendar year.
And is that the same on Thurston, like the 5th?
And same on
Okay.
Thurston.
Yeah.
It would identify Thurston, but it does not decide, is it a 6 through 8?
Got it.
Is it a 5 through 8?
That's helpful.
That's
Yeah.
decision point number 2.
Okay.
So decision point number 2 are what are the key features of the priority school, which is we need to look at new construction or renovation or repair. That's just required by the MSBA. What's the size? What's the enrollment? What's the grade configuration? So that is, are we combining MJ and Sheehan, or is Sheehan a standalone project? Is Thurston a 6 through 8? Is it a consolidated 5 through 8? Is it a 5/6/7 through 8? Those would be identified through feasibility.
And is feasibility done on our side, or is it done by the MSBA?
Feasibility is done on our side.
Okay.
So feasibility,
Once
once
we're
you're
in.
invited into the MSBA pipeline,
We kind of go through this process again.
yeah, so if we're accepted into the pipeline in December of 2026, you bring forth you bring on a project team, you bring on an OPM, you bring on a designer, you have a building committee, and then you identify by the end of feasibility, realistically in late 2028, early 2029, what's your preferred option to bring forward for a construction project. To layer on Michelle's timeline, what this means is in that scenario, we begin, because I know there are a lot of concerns around what's the financial impact in the community. If construction begins in April of 2030, it means we're not starting construction borrowing until fiscal year 2031, with the bulk of that in fiscal year 2032 and beyond.
And the library comes off
31.
in 31.
And the library, yeah, I didn't know that, yeah.
Sorry, that's.
No, but that's helpful context, right? The town library would come off in 2031.
We would ask a town meeting prior to that for the feasibility funds.
Yeah,
And
so-
that's about 2 million.
Yeah, so feasibility,
Clear.
give or take, let's just say, I'm going to say 2 to 3, just not to put a lower number out in case it winds up being higher. That would be funding to be sought in this scenario. If we're invited into the pipeline in December of 26, realistically May of 27, unless there's a vehicle to get that earlier. But you'd be looking for funding that would likely be able to be done through a free cash allocation and not borrowing
Yep.
in spring of 27. And so that's what that looks like. To put all of this on, and then occupancy in September of 2032. To put all of that on one slide. So we identify the priority by December, that's decision point number 1. We submit to the MSBA. Everything is asterisked, so because it's contingent upon us getting into their pipeline. But decision point number 2 about size, grade configuration would be done by that late 2028, early 29. So we're talking about 3.5 years from now to make those decisions. Knowing that first decision point is really 8 months about what's our priority project. And so our immediate next steps are to provide multiple opportunities to have this conversation with the community, to share this plan, to gather feedback through community forums. We are looking right now to schedule 2 forums this spring. We know we want to do it before June 1st. This would likely be 1 in-person forum, 1 virtual forum. We're still trying to work to finalize dates right now. I've already talked to principals about coming to PTO meetings, and we'll do the show at PTO meetings. Obviously, school committee meetings, we'll have other boards and committees where we'll have these conversations. I say all the time, I'll talk to 2 people and a dog by the side of the street if they'll listen about this. So we're going to have a lot of conversation with the community to gather that feedback. Because ultimately, the decision will rest initially on this committee. I would anticipate at our December school committee meeting to give the direction that we want to move forward with an SOI on school A, whatever school A is. So it's the process that we're going to go through to the next 8 months to gather all this feedback, now that we've started the conversation, to identify where we want to go with that. And in terms of our guiding principle, and I will say this phrase a whole lot of times, but we want to find the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solution for our buildings to provide a top-tier education for our students. It's not just the most educationally appropriate, it's not just the most cost-effective, it has to be both. And so we really want to do what we need to do for our students and for the community. We need to keep both of those lenses in mind as we have these conversations. So that's the framing. Our plan with this immediately is that we will send these slides, and thank you to WMC, who's not broadcasting this live tonight but is recording this, but we would send a link to the recording of this as well too, and the slides out to our staff and out to the community as soon as they're ready to go, hopefully tomorrow, so that we can start the conversation. And as soon as we identify dates for our first community forums, we'll blast those out to everybody as well too. So thank you to Michelle, thank you to Don from Durham-Whitty, who's back there as well. And if there are other questions the committee has, I think this is a great time to either ask questions or kind of share thoughts about next steps.
No, I just want to reiterate, I do want at some point, I think we go through this process, think about the preschool. I know there's a lot of moving parts with the town and with this stuff, but I do think it'd be a miss because we've been talking about that being actually a real issue.
Yeah.
If we didn't somehow address it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we're able to talk about that soon.
Okay, great.
I know Tony had mentioned it before, but I want to reiterate, I want a better understanding of the enrollment projections. I think it's obvious the problems we have at Sheehan and Thurston. I was a little bit surprised to see the increase that's projected, considering the housing market and everything, and trends in older adults wanting to stay home and all of that. So I feel like it's really important to nail that down. Looking at the pre-read and the data that was provided wasn't super helpful to me. I found it to be almost some of the tables and some of the information seemed to contradict each other.
In the enrollment document that was provided?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if there was an opportunity to take a deeper dive into that, it would be really helpful to me because I think that's important.
I wonder also if, with the MBTA Communities Act, if that was taken into consideration as well with some of the new builds that are happening right now. Even I'm thinking of like the Everett Street.
Right.
I don't remember how many. I know there was something that you
Forget
yeah.
the numbers. I mean, I
But
think
I
we.
don't know if that was taken into consideration with in terms of enrollment projections.
Yeah, the example I'm thinking of, like the data provided, if I was understanding it correctly, it said we expect a bigger bump at Downey for elementary school students, but at Sheehan, it looked like there were more houses and more people age 65 and older that you would expect to move out. So I can't really make sense of it all, and we need to, I think, so.
Do you have a list of questions that you want me to send to the demographer?
I can put one together, I have my
Okay,
comments.
that would
and I
be
can
great.
put- Yeah.
Sure.
can
And
share those
for any,
too.
yeah.
Thank you.
We're happy to reach back out to him and actually address any of the questions you have.
Super,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right, so a lot more to come in the conversation with the community about this. Again, thank you, Michelle, for your time this evening.
Thank you.
And all of your
Thank you
work.
for Michelle.
Listening through all the slides.
Thank you. All right, so moving along, we are going to talk about the professional development calendar for next year.
Sure. I apologize for not having a slide to put up. That was a late catch that we were working so hard on the facilities that this one slipped by us. But linked into the agenda and soon to be posted for folks, we have put together the professional learning, the early release dates for next year. So already you've approved the calendar with our holidays, the general school calendar, first day, last day. This just layers on the typical early release days that we have. It's the same number of early release days as there were this past year, and we've made efforts to have them staggered and not too many coming closely together. The one time you'll see where that's not the case, or the two times actually are around elementary conference times, where we have the back-to-back weeks, so that our elementary teachers are pulling the data, they're pulling together their preparations, and then they have 2 weeks of conferences back-to-back. Other than that, we've staggered them as best as we can, and we always appreciate your support in being able to provide the professional learning for teachers over the course of the year. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you. And we will move on to action items. So can I have a motion to approve our March 20th meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. And then, Lemma, do you want to talk about the Ameresco gift?
So I've shared a memo that just updates the school committee on the fact that the Westwood schools received a check for $6,000.
Nice.
And this was Ameresco's donation and contribution towards a fund that the schools would use to plant up to 10 trees. And part of the funding is coming from funds from the Conservation Commission. So the Select Board has released that and authorized us to spend them. I anticipate that the planting will happen in the fall, just because we would like to wait to see the solar canopy erected, and we don't want any harm to trees that are newly planted while that work is underway. So we're looking
So
for the
total of
school
10
committee-
trees.
Total of 10 trees between both funding
Between both
sources, and
funding
Ameresco's check for 6,000 would pay for half of them. So we're looking for the school committee to approve the donation.
We're thrilled.
Yep.
I will motion to approve this donation.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. And thank you to Ameresco and to the Conservation Commission for that. And Tony.
I'd like to make a motion to accept a grant in the amount of $21,950 from Master Cyber Center, a division of the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we need a roll call vote? It says roll
Yes,
call.
I think we do.
Do we? Okay.
Maya?
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Thank you. The last action item is the approval of school trips.
So there's 2 trips in your agenda, both at the high school. One is during J-term of 2026. It's a service-based learning trip to Costa Rica for students in grades 9 through 11. And the other is in summer of 2026 in late June, early July. And it's a travel-based learning trip to Greece for students in grades 9 through 11. So,
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So motion passed. And does anybody have any new business that'd like to bring up? Covered a lot tonight.
No.
No? All right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
executive session.
Oh, we have to,
Sorry.
sorry.
I'll make a motion to move into executive session to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. If the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body, and I further move that we will not return to public session.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
So moved. Roll call. Tony?
Yes.
Joanna?
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Maya?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
And now we adjourn. Or now we never.